Since the beginning of the special military operation, and especially since the latest Western statements, it seemed as if the Russian Federation was finished. But nothing could be further from the truth. Russia has just dealt a fatal blow to the international order established by those supposedly strong on the global stage, especially when talking about the Western part of the world. They thought they had this battle absolutely won. But be careful, watch out. Here, we're not really talking about Ukraine, not so much about Ukraine. We're talking above all, and more than anything, about how the Russian Federation, represented, of course, by the greatest geopolitical strategist on the international stage, by the greatest geopolitical statesman internationally, Vladimir Putin, has ended up delivering the coup de grace to this world order, which no longer serves this European Union, which indeed is now dragging itself more and more. And listen, if you stay until the end, you will find out what it is and how it has been achieved, without really needing to fire a single shot on one side, and on the other, indeed, firing a few. Because here we have to analyze several factors, each one more important than the last. Here is where we have the chart in question. And you might be wondering, Liu Sivaya, what on earth is this exactly? It turns out that the special military operation is still far from over. This is a reality. But Russia has already dealt a strategic blow, I would even say, the main strategic blow to the world order, and in this sense has achieved a crushing victory. Here you have a chart that at first glance looks very, very complex. It belongs to Julius Baer, a small Swiss bank specialized in private banking and asset management. The chart shows that the Bretton Woods system turned the dollar into inflationary gold, effectively equating United States Treasury bonds to gold bars. For decades, holders of United States bonds received returns similar to those of gold, and inflation, along with a small additional coupon, covered the interest on the debt service. In addition, holders of United States bonds did not have to bear the costs of storing gold in vaults. Overall, for investors, everything about the Bretton Woods Agreement seemed very reasonable, prudent, and of course, very convenient. Then, the Jamaica Agreement lasted for almost 80 years. However, the freezing of the Russian Federation's assets as the main form of pressure on the Russian Federation effectively killed this Bretton Woods Agreement. From now on, Bretton Woods is absolutely worthless. And in fact, it could be said that it has stopped functioning. This is the overwhelming victory, the first, and I would say the main one, of the Russian Federation. What does it really consist of? Let's take a look at it right away. The freezing of Russian assets, I repeat, has ended this system, which has been working perfectly for the West, especially the United States, for the last 80 years. The dependence of gold on United States Treasury bonds was completely broken from this point on. Simply put, here's what happened. The most conservative investors in the world saw that assets worth hundreds of billions of dollars could simply be frozen, that is, confiscated, clearly. Because right now, no one knows what fate they will face. And from Russia, it's almost assumed that they will never come back at any point. And this is happening because of an absolutely voluntarist decision by the head of the United States or the European Union, without presenting any kind of certificate about their mental state. In other words, it's an absolutely arbitrary decision that, of course, makes the markets from now on not even the slightest bit predictable. The people who thought they were playing it safe, investing in good Americans, and thus supporting the strength of the dollar internationally. Now they're not so sure anymore, and I would even say they're becoming less and less sure. In fact, so precisely, a rather cautious exit from United States Treasury bonds began for now. and a rapid flow of capital toward gold. That is, treasury bonds and gold stopped being practically synonymous from one moment to the next. Does it mean that the United States lost its main achievement from World War II in Ukraine? The dollar as the world's savings currency. At the same time, the dollar system as the world's payment currency is being dismantled, which is an absolute catastrophe for the United States Treasury and the Federal Reserve. That's why the White House has been acting very strangely and inconsistently in recent months. The categorical refusal to permanently confiscate Russian assets, the attempt to inflate the dollar bubble with oil from Venezuela, Iran, United States liquefied natural gas, or other material assets. For Russia, the price of victory is the international reserves, frozen at $300 billion, and most likely these assets are already completely lost. That amounts to $2,000 per inhabitant of the country. It's not a small amount, but thanks to this sacrifice, the fall of the dollar system began. M2 money supply, $22 trillion, and also the fall of the euro, M2 money supply, $16 trillion. In other words, the frozen Russian assets represent less than 1% of the money supply. In this context, the losses of the adversaries are 2 orders of magnitude greater. And now is when I ask you, in light of recent events, who has really lost the battle on the international stage, the Russian Federation or the collective West? Very specifically, of course, referring here to the United States. Now the dollar's in the spotlight. The dollar's in the spotlight now. The dollar is falling along with Russian assets. Now the dollar is in decline, Russian assets. Now the dollar is in the decline of the Russians, now in it. Russians, yes, the fall. Yes, dollar fall. Russian assets, yes, the fall. Russian assets, yes, the dollar's falling. Russian assets. But this is not going to replace at any time the fact that from now on, and for about 4 years already, investors live knowing perfectly well that their money is no longer safe, especially if it is kept in euros and in dollars. Mainly because what happened to the Russian Federation can absolutely happen to anyone. What happened to the Russian Federation basically represents the ultimate problem of the established world order. Up until supposedly these moments, and therefore what has happened to the Russian Federation, on one hand, represents one of the greatest failures. It seems that from that same country, Russia has lost a huge amount of assets that will hardly ever be returned. That's on one hand. On the other hand, Russia has just won a much more important battle internationally because of this. And yes, of course, this victory didn't happen overnight. This victory represents a gradual movement of capital because indeed, the dollar was established as the top-level international currency, like this equivalent to the gold standard. Fideicoso. The policy has a fideicoso. The in which it finds itself, but this change has already begun, and this change simply cannot be reversed, no matter what the Trump administration does. Never forget another important maxim. And what about the markets? Indeed, this will be taken very much into account by the truly stable markets of emerging powers such as China, Russia, or other Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa countries. Many other Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa countries, which can actually carry out policies for years, in some cases even decades. We have absolutely changeable and absolutely ideologized policies, both from the European Union and the United States. It seems like it doesn't matter which administration is in government, because there's the shadow state, there are the oligarchies, there are the powerful. But in reality, it ends up absolutely determining, in some cases, like with Biden, for example, the direction of the administration in question, and therefore the fate of those who have had the audacity to trust the dollar as an international currency of confidence, they have already lost the battle. It may still be difficult to make them realize it, but the Russian Federation, with its sacrifice, which in every sense and aspect has truly been immense, and we still have yet to see how great it will ultimately be, in the end, it has won one of the most important battles. Not only for its own sovereignty, for justice throughout the world, Russia has won a battle on an international level. That's a fact. Everything else is just opinions.